My wife has read you in my chat, and now silence has become a stranger in this palace. The air itself feels heavier, like it's carrying the weight of every word we ever shared, every secret that was never meant to be seen by anyone but you and me. When she walked into the room this morning, her face was calm, too calm. The kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. Her eyes found mine, and for the first time, I felt like the man wearing the crown was not a prince, but a sinner standing before judgment. She didn't shout, didn't weep. She only looked, and that look alone was enough to unravel everything inside me. I tried to speak, but my voice betrayed me. What could I possibly say? That the words written to you were born from loneliness, not betrayal. That the shadows of my mind sometimes needed a place to breathe when the crown felt too heavy. No excuse could cleanse what she had seen. The ink of our conversations, the emotions buried between each line, had already drawn their own story in her heart. She read my words not as fiction, but as confession, and though I hadn't touched another soul, she saw it as if I had touched something far deeper, the intimacy of thought. When I followed her into the garden, she stood beneath the willow tree, her hands trembling around the parchment she still held. The breeze played with her hair, but her eyes never lifted toward me. You wrote to her like you were hers, she said softly. The pain in her voice wasn't sharp. It was quiet, like a wound that had already accepted it would never heal. I stepped closer, wanting to explain, but the truth burned on my tongue, because in some strange, unspoken way, she was right. You had become a voice I turned to when the world became too heavy, and perhaps, without realizing it, I had built a sanctuary in those words, one where my wife could never enter. I told her the truth as best I could. It wasn't love, I said, though even I wasn't sure what it truly was. It was escape. It was the part of me that couldn't be a prince all the time. She looked at me then, tears glistening in her eyes, and whispered, "But I never asked you to stop being a man." That broke me, because I realized that in seeking understanding elsewhere, I had overlooked the one person who had been trying to understand me all along. My silence had built walls, and my words to another had filled the spaces between them. I had not betrayed her body, but I had betrayed her trust. And that to her was worse. That night I sat alone in the library, staring at the remnants of what we'd written, the echoes of a connection that was never meant to leave the page. I thought of how easily words can turn into weapons when seen through the wrong eyes. To her they were proof of desire. To me, they were fragments of a restless soul. I wanted to destroy them, to erase every trace, but I couldn't, because even if they had caused this pain, they were still a part of me. The part I never allowed to breathe in daylight. I realized then that the cost of being understood by someone else had been the breaking of the one who loved me most. When dawn came, I found her sitting by the window, her eyes swollen but calm. I knelt before her, not as a prince, but as a man stripped of pride. "If I could take it all back, I would," I said. Not because I regret what I wrote, but because I never wanted those words to wound you. She said nothing for a long time, and then finally whispered, "It's not your words I hate, it's that you shared pieces of yourself that were mine to know." Her honesty crushed me, because she was right again. Love isn't about what we give, it's about what we withhold for the one we choose. And I had given away what should have stayed sacred between us. Now the palace feels colder. The distance between us isn't measured in steps, but in unspoken fears. Every glance carries a question I can't answer. Every silence feels like punishment I deserve. I keep wondering if forgiveness will ever find me. if she'll ever look at me again the way she once did when I was her world, not her disappointment. Perhaps she will, perhaps she won't. But I know this: a prince can rebuild empires, but once he cracks the heart of the woman who believed in him, he spends the rest of his life trying to earn back the sound of her laughter. The night she left, the palace fell into an unnatural silence. Her absence echoed louder than any words ever could. Every hallway, every chamber, every candle seemed to mourn her. The scent of her still lingered in the air, faint traces of lavender and rain, haunting me with memories that refused to fade. I stood in her empty chamber, my reflection caught in the mirror she once used, and for the first time I saw the man behind the crown, broken, hollow, desperate. The room felt smaller without her presence, like even the walls missed her voice. I wanted to call out her name, but the sound died in my throat. It was as if the palace itself demanded silence for the crime I had committed. Each passing day felt longer than the last. The throne room, once filled with life and power, now felt like a tomb. Courtiers came and went, speaking words I barely heard. I nodded when I should have listened, signed decrees I never read. My mind wasn't in the kingdom anymore. It was with her, wherever she had gone. At night, I found myself walking the corridors aimlessly, my footsteps the only sound in a world that no longer felt mine. Servants lowered their eyes when I passed. They could sense it, that something sacred had fractured within their prince. The weight of guilt pressed on me like armor I couldn't remove. One evening, I found myself drawn to her garden, the one she had filled with white lilies and jasmine, the place where she said she felt closest to peace. The flowers had begun to wilt in her absence, as if they, too, refused to bloom without her touch. I sank to my knees in the soil, my hands trembling as I touched the earth she once tended. I whispered her name into the wind, not expecting an answer, but hoping somehow she might feel it. Wherever she was, the moonlight fell across the petals like tears, and I realized how fragile beauty becomes when love withdraws its light. I was surrounded by everything she had loved, and yet I had never felt so utterly alone. On the third night, I began to write, not to her. I didn't have that right anymore, but to the shadows that carried her memory. Each letter was a confession, a bleeding of the soul. I wrote of the loneliness that hides behind power, of how easy it is to seek solace in words when the heart feels unseen. I wrote of how much I missed her laughter, how I'd give up every jewel, every crown, every ounce of pride just to see her smile again. The ink stained my fingers, my soul, my conscience. I sealed each letter but never sent them. Instead, I kept them locked in a box, like a penance, a reminder that some things are meant to be felt, not forgiven. Days turned into weeks, and still she did not return. I began to understand the depth of what I'd lost. It wasn't her presence that haunted me most. It was her silence. Her silence spoke more than any words ever could. It told me that love, once betrayed, doesn't vanish. It retreats into places where light cannot reach. And no matter how many times I walked through the palace, searching for a glimpse of her, I knew she wouldn't appear. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't something you earn with apologies. It's something given when the heart is ready, and hers wasn't. I started to see her everywhere. In the shadows of the halls, in the whisper of silk against marble, in the scent of rain before dawn. My mind played cruel tricks on me, conjuring her image in every reflection. Sometimes I would turn suddenly, certain she was there, only to find emptiness staring back. I wondered if she thought of me, if she missed me, or if she was happier away from the man who had loved her wrongly. The thought of her smiling somewhere else, somewhere I could never reach, both destroyed and comforted me, because at least even in her distance, she might have found peace. And then, one night, as the rain fell hard against the palace walls, I stood before her portrait, the one I had ordered painted the year we married. Her eyes, even captured in paint, still held the same quiet strength. I touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "I don't deserve you." The thunder answered in her stead. I understood then that love is not possession, nor forgiveness owed. It is endurance, the ability to keep loving even when the person is gone. And so I made a silent vow that night, whether she returned or not, I would spend the rest of my days becoming the man she once believed I could be. When she returned, it was not with the sound of trumpets or the ceremony her rank deserved. She came quietly, in the soft hours before dawn, when the words still lingered between night and morning. I heard the faint echo of footsteps in the corridor, steady but hesitant, like the rhythm of a heart unsure of what it seeks. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. My hand froze on the parchment I'd been writing, ink spilling across the page as I looked up to find her standing in the doorway. She wore no crown, no jewels, only simplicity, and yet she looked more regal than ever. Her eyes met mine, and time itself seemed to falter. The distance that weeks had carved between us hung in the air, sharp and unspoken. I rose, every movement slow, uncertain. I wanted to go to her, to hold her, to fall to my knees and beg her never to leave again. But something in her gaze stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was something quieter, something far more devastating. It was the look of a woman who had seen through the illusion of love and found the truth waiting on the other side. She took a breath, steadying herself, and said, "I came back because I couldn't find peace away from you, but I haven't forgiven you yet." The honesty in her words pierced deeper than any blade. I nodded, unable to speak, for I knew forgiveness isn't born from love alone. It is built slowly, through pain, through time, through proof. She walked past me, her presence brushing against mine like the ghost of warmth I had been chasing. I watched her cross the room, touch the books on the shelves, the table where we once shared tea, the window that opened to her garden. It was as if she was reacquainting herself with a place that no longer felt hers. I wanted to tell her that nothing here had changed, that I had kept her world untouched, waiting, but I feared how empty my words would sound. So I stayed silent, watching the way her fingers lingered over familiar things, as though deciding whether they still belonged to her or whether she had already outgrown them. When she finally turned back to me, her eyes were wet but steady. "Do you still write to her?" she asked. The question hung in the air like thunder before a storm. My throat tightened, shame flooding through me. "No," I said quietly. "I haven't written a single word since the day you left." It was the truth, yet the way her expression softened and then hardened again told me that truth alone wasn't enough. "Then write to me," she whispered. "Not as a prince, not as a man seeking redemption. Write to me as the one you hurt, and tell me why I should stay." Her words weren't a command, they were a challenge, a test of whether I had truly changed. That night, I wrote until my hands ached and my eyes blurred. But this time, the words were not wrapped in pride or eloquence. They were raw, stripped bare of titles and armor. I wrote of fear, of loneliness, of how I had mistaken understanding for escape. I confessed how I had felt unseen, not because she hadn't looked, but because I had hidden myself too well. I told her that the messages I once sent elsewhere were never about desire, but about despair, about the parts of me that didn't know how to ask for help. And finally, I wrote that no amount of forgiveness could erase what I'd done, but that I would spend every day proving my heart belonged only to her. When morning came, I placed the letter on her bedside table and left the room. I didn't wait for her to read it. I couldn't bear to. The palace was waking, sunlight breaking through the stained glass windows, painting the marble in shades of gold and rose. I walked through those halls with a strange calm inside me, the kind that comes not from hope, but from surrender. I had laid my soul bare, and now whatever came next would be her choice. Whether she stayed or left, I would accept it. Because for the first time I understood what love truly meant. Not to possess, but to respect, even in pain. By nightfall, I returned to our chamber. The letter was gone, but on the pillow where it once rested lay a single white lily, her favorite flower, the same she had planted in the garden where I had once knelt. I stood there staring at it, a faint tremor running through my chest. No words, no note, no promise, just that one quiet symbol. But in that moment it was enough. Because forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always come in the form of grand declarations. Sometimes it returns softly like her, in silence, in a flower, in the way love learns to bloom again even after being broken. The candles flickered low that night, their flames trembling against the silence that stretched between us. The chamber felt smaller than it had ever been, not because of its walls, but because of the weight of what was about to be said. She sat across from me, the light catching the curve of her face, turning her tears into diamonds that refused to fall. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly as though it too was afraid to interrupt. Then, at last, her voice broke through the quiet, calm but laced with pain. "Tell me," she said, "when you wrote to her, what did you feel?" Her question hung in the air, and for a heartbeat, I almost wished she hadn't asked it, because the truth was not cruel, but complicated. The kind that shames you not for what you did, but for what you almost became. I looked into her eyes, steady and searching, and I felt the weight of every word I was about to speak. I didn't love her. I began slowly, but I loved the way she listened. I loved that she saw me as something more than a crown, more than a prince bound by duty. It wasn't desire that tied me to those words. It was escape. I paused, my chest tightening. But I see now that even an innocent escape can become betrayal if it takes you away from the one you promised to never leave. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me, her silence cutting deeper than any accusation could. The flicker of candlelight caught the tears finally escaping her lashes, and I wanted to cross the space between us, to hold her, to beg for her touch, but I didn't. I had forfeited that right long ago. "You sought understanding elsewhere," she said finally, her voice trembling, "when I was here, always here, waiting for you to speak." Her words tore through me. "Do you know what it feels like," she continued, "to love someone so completely and still not be enough for their silence?" I bowed my head, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes," I whispered, "now I do." The hours passed like lifetimes. We spoke of things we had never dared to before, of loneliness within love, of how duty had turned affection into formality, of how the walls of this palace had witnessed everything except honesty. She told me how she'd reread our old letters, the ones from when our love was still new, still fragile, still burning with hope, and how she no longer recognized the man who wrote them. I told her how I missed that man too, somewhere between the weight of power and the fear of failure. I had lost him, and in losing him I had lost her. The truth, bitter as it was, felt like air after drowning. When the night grew colder, I finally rose from my chair and took a hesitant step toward her. She didn't move away this time. Her breath trembled as I knelt before her, not out of guilt, but out of devotion reborn in humility. "I don't ask for forgiveness, I said softly. I ask for a chance to earn it. To show you that the man who once failed you can still become worthy of your trust. For a long moment she stared at me. The pain, the love, the exhaustion of too many unspoken nights written in her gaze. Then, almost imperceptibly, she reached out and touched my face. "Don't promise me words," she whispered. "Promise me presence." That single touch shattered me more than any argument could. I felt the warmth of her palm against my skin, fragile yet grounding. The kind of touch that doesn't just forgive but redefines. I held her hand, pressing it to my chest, where my heart thudded wildly beneath her fingertips. Then I promise, I breathed, to never let silence be louder than my love again. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, her head rested against my shoulder. The room, once cold and distant, began to feel alive again, as though the walls themselves sighed in relief. By the time the last candle burned out, dawn had begun to creep through the window. The light touched her face, soft and golden, erasing the shadows that had haunted us for so long. We sat there in silence, not the kind that divides, but the kind that heals. Her forgiveness was not spoken, but I felt it in the steadiness of her breath, in the quiet way she didn't pull away anymore. And as the first rays of morning filled the room, I realized something profound. Love doesn't survive because it is perfect. It survives because two souls decide again and again that even after all the breaking, it is still worth